Okay, so firstly, we're going to have a look at attentional balance. And I will spend a bit of time on this because without attentional balance, everything else is fundamentally impossible. Attentional balance is the underpinning foundation of resilience. So firstly, we're going to look at why attentional balance, and then we're going to get into the how. All right, so at this point, I'd like to do another little exercise with you. I'd like you to, if you don't mind, to type into the chat window the answer to this. What's going on in your mind when you're not feeling good? You're not feeling happy, you're feeling anxious, things are going wrong for you in your mind. What's happening in the mind? What might your second darts be that we spoke about above? Worrying about worrying. Love that. Fear, loss of fear of not being in control, a very, very common one. Many of us believe that we're in control. And therefore, if we believe that we're in control, we fear losing control. And of course, the fact is we don't have much control about much except for ourselves. Frustration, helplessness. Yeah. These are all second darts. These are the typical second darts, telling ourselves stories about ourselves, worrying about this and that, too old to do this and that. Many of these things are simply stories which are challengeable. And cognitive balance is about challenging those stories. Okay, fantastic. So stop that one. And what I'd like you to do now is let's get a little bit more positive. What is it that's going on in your mind? Perhaps even in the face of situations like this, you may notice that you get some relief from time to time. What is it that's in your attention when you're feeling kind of okay, when there's a sense of well-being arising? What's happening then? What are you attending to when things are feeling okay? Taking multiple different perspectives is coming up, or perspective. Looking at the content. Yeah, that sounds to me like focusing on what's happening in the moment.
Without getting fused with or carried away by that content.
When you're able to focus and get things done, when you're being grateful or thankful about things. Yeah. So, what really perhaps comes up from this is the fact that you already know that it's about where we place our attention. And there's a psychologist, or there isn't a psychologist, there was a psychologist called William James, who is regarded as the father of modern psychology, or the founder of modern Western psychology. And here was a man who was really well ahead of his time. And he said quite a lot about attention more than 100 years ago. A lot of it was really excellent and is now validated by neuroscience. And I'm going to read some of this stuff out because it's really quite profound. He said this: the ability to bring back a wandering attention or a wandering focus again and again and again is the very root of judgment, character, and will. So inside character is this whole area of being at one's best in difficult situations. And he then went on to say that if there was such a thing as an education which could kind of improve this or train this, this would be the education par excellence. What he means is it would be the best education that you could have. Sadly, at that time, about 120 or so years ago, they didn't believe that they knew how to train it. So he said that this is an easier thing to define as an ideal than it is to give any directions for bringing it about. Well, modern neuroscience has now provided proof for, it really is proof, not just support, but proof for 1 and 2, for the fact that being able to manage our attention is the root of everything, actually, in the context of our well-being, and also, just in case you're interested, your professional success too. And it's also shown that this number 3, which is that we can't train it, you've either got it or you don't. We also know that that is not true. Okay, so that's something worth knowing, that it is possible to train it. So what is it? What do we mean by attentional balance? Well, it's really quite simple. It's so simple, and we can do this in any moment that we remember to do it. But the problem really is developing the skill of remembering, as we're going to find out in a minute. Attentional balance is simply attention placed and sustained at will on that which is useful to us. Very, very simple. and useful to us in the context of our success and also our well-being. It's simply about making wise choices of where we place our attention on things like our goals, things like the tasks, actions, and behaviors that support those goals, things like skills that we may have that might be in support of those goals, our strengths, which often go missing in action, don't they, when we're stressed, and other mental resources that we may have, which are also going missing in action, such things as patience, curiosity, acceptance, letting go, basic core mental resources that we all have within us that often go missing in action at the times that we need them. Okay. Where are we? Okay, yeah, our values. Our values really relate to that which we care most about in the world. And we'll be talking a bit about this under cognitive balance. This is the domain of cognitive balance. External resources and relationships that can potentially support us often go missing in action. We often feel so alone when we're facing these difficult situations. And we're not. We've got resources, both internally and externally, that can support us. We just need to bring our attention to them in the moment that we need them, and we don't tend to do that. So the best known way to train our focus is through the formal and informal practice of mindfulness. Okay. So now, and really just to say that mindfulness is really known to be the foundation for mental effectiveness. This is not controversial. Okay, so I'm going to basically now, I'm going to give you something which hopefully will inspire you to practice this fundamental foundational skill. All right, before I go there, actually, so mindfulness involves simply, just tell you what it is for some of you that may not know. Mindfulness involves the practice of just being present, moment by moment, best you can, with an object of attention. And in the formal practice of what's known as mindfulness meditation, the object is normally the breath. We just simply place attention on our breath. We notice when we've been distracted by sensations, thoughts, emotions, or whatever. We acknowledge that we've been distracted with our mind. We just say, oh, distraction, to ourselves in our mind. And we just bring our attention back to the breath again and again and again. And if you're doing a 10-minute formal practice, that might happen 100 times, and that is a good thing. Because mindfulness trains the neural architecture of attentional control and also emotional self-regulation and the circuitry of resilience. It supports our ability to pay attention on demand to that which is useful and to become undistractable by thoughts, feelings, anxieties, or even physical distractions. So with this formal practice, we're quite literally using the mind to change the brain to change the mind. And as I mentioned, it's the same process as learning any other skill. Okay. We're leveraging this thing called experience-dependent neuroplasticity. Now, just in case you're not really aware of what mindfulness is, and maybe even for some of you that really do, I'm going to offer you an operational definition which might be a little more inspiring than some that you might find on the internet. So we talk about mindfulness as comprising two awarenesses. One is called immediate awareness. We call it immediate awareness. And what we mean by immediate awareness is this immediate, ongoing knowing of what is in your mind, which are obviously normally thoughts, and what is in your body, which are feelings or emotions, but without an immediate reaction. What we tend to do without this training, most of us, is the moment that a thought comes into the mind, it becomes a fact. We fuse with it. It's actually called cognitive fusion. And it becomes a fact, and then we may or may not create an emotion as a result of our reaction to that fact that we tell ourselves, which then becomes us. So we don't just notice the emotion, we become the emotion, okay, by immediately reacting to it. And then what happens is a default immediate reaction strategy, trying to remove that emotion. So mindfulness is about knowing all of this process going on as a witness without the immediate judgment, without the immediate resistance, without the immediate reaction. And then at the same time, mindfulness implies that we can remember. We call it self-remembering, which is simply remembering what is useful to us. There's this ongoing awareness that arises of our true goals. What do we really want? Our true values. And then our strengths and our internal and external resources. And this knowledge. And so we're able to say to ourselves, oh, I'm thinking and feeling this. Oh, but I want and have this. And we do it almost in the same moment. And basically, we're building the neural circuitry of attention. Now, I'm not going to do a practice, but I'll show you something that you can download that will help you to do the practice. Download when I say our, I now mean the potential project, our app. It's a very, very simple, well gamified app. So it's a really useful app to use, and yet it's really simple. Apart from actually guiding you through 8 sequential practices, it also provides you with useful information about the cultivation of certain core mental strategies that support resilience, such as presence, patience, letting go, curiosity, kindness, all of which are products of mindfulness. They arise through mindfulness, but we can also direct our attention through practice to cultivating these qualities. Or you can just contact us and take one of our many offerings through the Potential Project that are oriented to cultivating resilience through mindfulness. Or you can contact us with a view to taking this short mini-series that we're launching through this little workshop. And what's actually happening, and I thought it's worth, we're not making this stuff up as we go along. There's a lot of science behind this. What the various practices of mindfulness are doing,
among other things,
is strengthening part of the brain called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. And this organ has been shown to actually thicken or grow and become much more active with mindfulness practitioners. And just in a very, very small nutshell, this organ is that which supports your ability to keep your attention on what is useful to you when doing that is actually more difficult for you. So it enables you to notice that your attention is going off track and to effortlessly divert your attention to that which is useful to you. Okay, so that's actually worth doing, because once this organ in the brain, if you wish, this muscle has grown and become more active, your ability to be resilient will improve alongside that on its own. For most of us, of course, what actually happens is that doesn't last very long for many of us, and we go off track, and the brain becomes very, very noisy. Mindfulness also helps you to notice that you've wandered off. It's by strengthening the insula, it actually grows the insula as well, just in a very simplistic terms. And it also grows a part of the brain called the anterior cingulate cortex, which is known as the error processing center of the brain. That processes things that are happening in our environment that are not expected and decides where our attention should go.
And then finally, the frontoparietal control network fires up. And that gives us the ability to deliberately guide attention and then action towards our intentions.
So this is like the self-remembering piece. That is strengthened, that circuitry, so that we can then bring our attention back to applying our focus at will, which involves the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. So this is the neural circuitry of staying on track, which is grown or developed, or maybe you could say the highways get wider with mindfulness practice. Right. So I've spoken about the formal practice, but there are lots of informal things that you can do which build similar circuitry.
And this is about taking some of the things that we do again and again and again in our everyday lives and actually using these very things as mindfulness practices themselves, thereby making our effectiveness with those everyday things actually greater, at the same time as building the neural architecture and infrastructure of attentional control and resilience.
And these are things that you can do alongside your formal mindfulness practice. So making lists and then using, so it sounds very simple, many of you probably already make lists, but are you doing mindfulness of your list?
As an intentional practice. And what I mean by that is,
are you noticing what is on your list, bringing your attention back every time that you go off track with the most important thing that might be on your list? And I strongly recommend that you have a look, if you haven't done so, on the guru of list making, and that is a gentleman called Stephen Covey, who came out with something called the 4 quadrants model, which helps you to organize your, if you wish, tasks into things that are simply urgent and things that are actually important. And most of us spend too much time on the urgent and not enough time on the important, which gets us into trouble. So do have a look do a search on Google for Stephen Covey or Covey and 4 quadrants, and you'll see his model pop up. Another thing that you can do as a practice is to have conversations with people and treat them as mindfulness practices. So what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean by that is noticing that you're just about, the idea firstly is always to create an intention. So you know that you might be going into a conversation with somebody that maybe habitually bores you, or that you maybe don't like because you believe that they always say the same thing and perhaps they have certain values or ways of doing things that you don't like. And you may notice that when you go into conversation with those people, your mind either goes into distraction. If you're bored, you start wondering what's going on with WhatsApp, or attending to other things in your mind, going into the supermarket and planning your dinner or something like this, or whatever. Or on the other hand, you might start noticing that you're listening to what the mind is interpreting about what it is that this person might be saying. Okay, this also happens in meetings. So you create the intention when you know that you're going to go into a conversation with somebody like this. And you say to yourself, oh, right, here's an opportunity to practice mindfulness. My intention here is just to keep my attention on this individual and actually what they are saying. And every time I notice that I'm being distracted by either cognitive rigidity, which is predicting what they're going to say, and making assumptions and then going into mind wandering because of that, or simply just going somewhere else because you're bored, every time that you notice that, you're just going to bring your attention back to the object, which in this case is not the breath, but it's the person and what they're saying. That, number one, builds the neural infrastructure of resilience that I said earlier on. And number two, you might even have the spin-off of learning something new and or improving your relationship with that individual. Not a bad thing to do. So that's another thing you can do. Another thing that you can do as a practice is noticing your action addiction. Noticing your desire just to check the next email, do the next thing, check the next WhatsApp message, be busy with your mind. Notice it and bring your attention back to your list. What actually is, in fact, important for me to be doing right here, right now? Noticing impulses or surfing them. So often, it turns out that most things that we do or even don't do are preceded by impulses. Sometimes these impulses might lead to cravings. Sometimes they might just be impulses to yell. Maybe your kids are acting up and you feel impulsed or impelled to yell at them. Before you do that, there's always a feeling in the body, which is known as an impulse, that you can feel. Train yourself to notice these impulses and just watch them as they arise in the body without reacting to them. And you will find that the impulse will subside. And you will find as a result of that, that you're going to be able to bring your attention back to that which is actually useful behavior, given that which you really care about. Emailing obviously is very, very similar to conversations, and noticing impulses. It's really just the ability to notice what it is that you're just about to do before you do it, and then redirecting your attention potentially to that which is useful. That's what really attention training does. And really what the result of that is this.
And this slide is courtesy of Potential Project.
You're able to deal with the first darts more skillfully. You could say that the first darts are the input to our sensory apparatus. Most of us will just go into autopilot reactivity, the automaticity of the installed patterns of reacting to first darts that come in will by default take us over and create these unuseful reactions for us. And what we want to do, of course, is to introduce a second of choice. And it's often, and in fact, it's not even a second. When we become skilled at this, it happens almost in the same moment as the agitation or emotion begins to arise. It allows us to get 1 second of awareness in which all wisdom and all skill arises. And what then happens is clarity occurs, resilience occurs, calm occurs, focus occurs, and effectiveness occurs, all powered by mindfulness. So well worth doing, well worth practicing. And I've spent a lot of time on that. I've spent a huge amount of time on that because it's so important, okay? Because without it, none of this other stuff that I'm just going to briefly talk about is going to make any difference.